Right? A little bit weird. And the good way to think of virtue of character for Aristotle is kind of like golf. Right? If you're golfing, you don't want to overswing, you don't want to underswing. You don't want too far to the right, you don't want too far to the left, you want it right in that appropriate spot right down the middle. Right? Now, in terms of golf, what's Aristotle? Let's translate this into a golf example. But surely actions are not enough for you, even in the case of these crafts, for it's possible to produce a golf shot by chance, or by following someone else's instructions. To be good golfers, then, we must both produce a good golf shot and produce it as a result of the golf knowledge that's in us. Alright? So, just performing the same sorts of actions over and over and over again does not necessarily gain us genuine virtue. Alright? Just producing a moderate kind of reaction does not necessarily turn into virtue of character, what Aristotle is claiming here. Alright? He continues here, moreover, in any case, what is true of crafts is not true of virtues, for the products of a craft determined by their own qualities whether they have been produced well. Where's the ball on the golf course? Right? Was it a good shot or was it not a good shot? Well, you can't argue with where the ball lands. Right? So, where was I here? So it suffices that they have the right qualities when they have been produced. But for actions in accord with the virtues to be done temperately or justly, it does not suffice that they themselves have the right qualities. Rather, the agent must also be in the right state when he does them. First, he must know that he's doing virtuous actions. Second, he must decide on them and decide on them for themselves. And third, he must also do them from a firm and unchanging state. So what Aristotle there has done is add three conditions, right, for genuine virtue. Right? So, 1, 2, 3. Right? First, he must know he's doing virtuous actions. Knowledge. Right. Second, he must decide on them and decide on them for themselves. Right. An action must be done for the sake of virtue. And thirdly, a firm and unchanging state. Alright? So we'll go through this again just quickly here. Alright? In the first case, we must know we're doing virtuous actions. Let's say I'm fiddling around with my CD player in the car. My speed drops a little bit on the highway and somebody is able to merge in front of me. And they give me a thank you wave. I did a nice thing, right? I let the person in front of me. They got in there okay. The problem is, I didn't know what the heck I was doing. Do I get credit for that action? Because remember, virtue is a state that we praise. Right? Do I deserve the thank you wave? No, I don't think so. Not in that situation, because I didn't do it on purpose. Right? I didn't even know what I was doing. I was fiddling with my CD player instead. So, knowledge is required for genuine virtue. Right? Secondly, an action must be done for the sake of virtue, or as Aristotle put it, he must decide on them, and decide on them for themselves. Well, what's the difference? Well, here's an example. Right? This will come up later when we turn to Kant. Right? Aristotle wants to prevent this sort of case, and it's a case from the Idiot's Guide to Understanding Ethics. Believe it or not, a surprisingly good publication. Right? Now, the Idiot's Guide to Understanding Ethics discusses what is called the case of kindly old Mrs. Smith and Sneaky Pete. Here's how the story goes. Right? Kindly old Mrs. Smith is on the way home from the market, right, overladen with too many grocery bags. Pete sees her and goes up to her and says, "Hey, can I help you with your garbage, with your grocery bags? I used to help my grandma with her groceries, and it would be no problem." She kindly agrees and hands her half her load. They head off towards her house. Right? Now, on the way back to her house, Pete formulates his plan. This is where he becomes Sneaky Pete. Right? When he gets to her door, he plans to drop the garbage bags, grab her purse, and make a run for it. He's going to mug her. Right? But just as they turn the corner to Mrs. Smith's house, a police officer's on the corner. And he helps her to the door, and she thanks him and thinks, what a nice young man. Did Pete do something nice? On the one hand, it seems he got the old lady home with her groceries. Right? So if the ends of the action, if we're applying what's called a teleological or end-oriented approach to ethics, it seems that Pete did help the old lady. Right? But Aristotle's a little bit worried about this. This is, again, a teleological ethics. Insofar as it's end-oriented, we want to be happy. Right? That's the greatest good, the final goal. It's the absolute telos, meaning end or goal. Right? And it's what we want at the end of the day. But Aristotle's a little bit worried about how such a teleological approach to ethics is going to pan out, because he pictures situations kind of like kindly old Mrs. Smith and Sneaky Pete there. So he wants to require of an action that can be considered genuinely virtuous, that it be done for the sake of virtue, or decided on and decided on for itself. Right? For example, if I save someone from drowning just so that I can enslave them and they can do what I want them to for the rest of their lives, I'm not doing a good thing. Right? If I'm helping an old lady home with her groceries just so that I get the opportunity to mug her, I'm not doing a good thing. You've got to do the right thing for the sake of doing the right thing in order to be worthy of the praise associated with virtue. And thirdly, you've got to do these actions from a firm and unchanging state. Right? So far we've seen knowledge. You've got to know what the heck you're doing in order to get credit for it. You've got to do it for the sake of virtue. You've got to do the right thing for the right reasons. And then finally, from a firm and unchanging state simply means, well, seeing as how moral virtue is a habitual disposition to our emotions, you've got to make a habit of it. Right? I can't one day decide I'm going to be a nice guy all day today and then figure I'm going to be a nice guy for the rest of my life. Virtue only works as virtue in terms of moral virtue if you make a habit out of it. Right? If you do it all the bloody time. Otherwise, right, if you develop a deficient habitual vice with regard to, say, truth-telling, right, you don't tell the truth all the bloody time. What you do is develop a deficient vice with regard to truth and become a liar. Right? Well, what's going to happen then? Your friends aren't going to trust you. Your co-workers aren't going to trust you. Nobody's going to trust you. Nobody's going to believe you anymore. And that habitual disposition becomes a state of character that we judge people by. Let's say I have a friend who is habitually broke and a little bit sticky with his fingers. Right? He sees, and you know, he's asking me for a reference for a job at a convenience store where he'll be in charge of keeping an eye on the till. This is somebody who is a kleptomaniac. Do I want to, based on the